Loving the Texas Book Festival. This is a crown jewel of Texas and a point of pride for Austin specifically. You know, we get to be here, and for many years now I've been a part of the festival, one with Torch as a community partner and also as a moderator and an author. I go to other festivals or hear about other festivals and they'll say, oh, we've got 5,000 people coming. We've got 7,000 people coming. I'll say, Texas Book Festival got like 40,000. So, contrary to what you might see in the news, we love books and literature in Texas, and we support our authors. Author of Forest Primeval, winner of the 2017 Kingsley Tufts Award, Horse in the Dark, winner of the Cave Canem Northwestern University Press Poetry Prize, Bluetail Fly, and her most recent collection of poems, The Shared World. Her work has appeared in numerous print and online journals, textbooks, and anthologies. Born in West Texas, she serves as an associate editor of Callaloo and an associate professor of English and creative writing at Dartmouth College. Rachel Eliza Griffiths is a multimedia artist, poet, and novelist, is the author of Miracle Arrhythmia, The Requited Distance, Mule and Pear, Lighting the Shadow, Seeing the Body, and her debut novel, Promise. Griffiths is widely known for her literary portraits, fine art photography, and lyric videos. Griffiths is also the image designer for the libretto, Castor and Patience, written by Tracy K. Smith, former U.S. Poet Laureate, and composer Gregory Spears, which premiered in July 2022 at the Cincinnati Opera House. Please welcome Rachel Eliza Griffiths and Vievee Francis. And so I have asked our incredible authors to read a small selection from their books, and then we will get into our moderated conversation. So first, we'll hear from Rachel, reading from Promise.
There we go, right? Can everyone hear me? Yes. It's so wonderful to be with all of you today and celebrate the Texas Book Festival with my sisters, Amanda Johnston and Torch, and Vievee Francis. I'm going to read a very, 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 very brief little taste from my debut novel, Promise. I'm going to read just a small passage from the end of the novel, and it's a sort of kind of internal monologue or kind of experience that my central character, Cynthia, has gone through so much as she is now 13 years old in her life, and she is coming into a deep remembering of who she was and where she's going. And so what you're hearing is just kind of almost an inner consciousness is the best way that I could describe it to you. In the dust of my people, the steel of my life strikes the flint of my memory. Here is the glowing shirt my father once wore over his bones and the education that fit around his ribs like armor. I remember his patience. Here is Mama escaping through the window, her suffering dissolving in the low yellow moonlight of the world, while faraway stars blaze like oceans. I am in the light in the bones beneath the sea, rising to meet the sky. I remember what those bones believed, the songs inside shells, the children who became coral, pearls, and anchors. There is a memory so old it has known better than to trust us with its full face. I am in the blood of that, the flare of firelight my great-grandfather admired before the white men shot him through his eyes. I am the eternity he cradled in his arms as he crossed. I am the smoke curling from the earth where indigo headstones wait for justice and sublime, undisturbed rest. I am but one voice, and there are countless dark women who live in the rivers, ashes, moons, and oceans. I remember when they rolled my name against the stars until I expanded. I remember what I was.
Break me, and I'll sing. My voice like marrow, a blood yolk spilled upon the counter. You can't stop this song. More hands than yours have closed around my throat. You may crack me. You have cracked me. I'm frightened, but so what? I'll testify. Witness. Listen if you can. I slurped the frog leg soup gone bad. Held a brass spoon like a barrel to my mouth. I could tell you what you want to hear, but I'd be broken just the same, so why not sing? I'm singing now, louder this time, and in the round. We are a wounding of red-plumed birds, every voice a bloody feather in the bone crown. A call to arms. A call to arms came as the lanterns floated upward on a night of celebration, and as flares spun upward out of the fear of those who set them. As shawled women smiled in the night, prayed into the night, and just as many ran through that swallowing night. As a bed was shared between those shepherding each other, and as those who shared nothing, nothing at all. As doctors took their hypocritical oath. As those who committed no harm and those who did, privileging some, denying others. As another dies by the hands of a group of strangers, and another by the hand of her father, and another because a stranger was lost in the anger of his mother. I am telling you, the call to arms came as we slept and as we marched, as we questioned and as we hid our heads in the dust of nostalgia or our spent dreams, as bills came due, as the debt grew and values diminished, as women decided other women mattered less, as we raged and as we ignored, and the doors began to close and close and close and close and close, and those who had opened them were marked for death or forgetting, and those who kicked them down are marked for death or slander. And this is not the first time a call to arms has caught us imagining it had stopped. The call is ever, is constant. Don't you hear it? Don't you? What? It didn't ring out in a peal of bells? It rings out in the silent appeals of children. A child who cannot remember the name of their father. You aren't listening. And if you are listening, you must keep your ear to the street, to the field, to the alleys and bridges, to the riverbed and floor banks of abandoned houses. And I hear the call to arms like a moan from a drain, desperately clogged, and in the lowing of cows in drought, in the impotent drone of senators, that officious blather. And in this moment, I hear the call and realize I am not the lion but the antelope, and I must resort to my feet and my wits amid a storm of teeth and claws on a day that began as any other day. And I can't tell you why I hear what too many refuse to admit, like the pounding of your own hearts upon hearing this.
All right, so thank you so much for taking a minute to center us in the work by sharing those beautiful readings. And now we get to switch a little bit and get into this brain work, right? Because my poet brain turns on, my Black woman brain is always on, and seeing the connections, it's like, okay, let's talk about the things. But one of the things I noticed in reading your books together, preparing for our conversation today, is that time plays an essential role in both of your books. Promise brings us back to the 50s and the beginning of the civil rights movement through the eyes of Sisters Ezra and Cynthia, and The Shared World brings us through the 60s and the heat of protest, the center of the movement. So I wanted to ask, why was it important to center your work during a specific time frame?
I'll show you the cover of this book. The cover of this book takes place in 1965, and it's on the bridge in Selma. And this is the poet Galway Canal. And he's just been hit over the head by an officer, and he's got blood on his shirt. This is his student, his Black student, Harriet Richardson. She's looking at her teacher in so much distress and with so much care. So when I saw this photograph, I knew, I already had the title for the book, but this is parity. This is an instructor's care for his student, caring enough to be there on that bridge and get heard. But it's also his student caring enough about her teacher to, despite everything around her, seeing him with that blood on his shirt. And what I wanted and didn't have in my childhood, and what I still feel that I'm fighting for, is not equality. That's not the word I use. I use the word parity. That I'm as human as anyone else, that everyone else is as human as I am. Parity seems to strike that balance with me. This is a picture of parity that happens within a governance and social framework without. And it lets me know that parity is possible, and it starts individual by individual, though must be seen through by law.
For Promise, for me, I was interested in exploring kind of the world that raised my parents. And so my parents were born in 1952 and 1954, and Promise begins in 1957. And I think there was a moment for me, when I think of relationships between parents and children, and I also, you have your parents in front of you, but you are too young to think of the world that has raised them oftentimes. Like, how are they so insane? Or how are they so wonderful? Or how, in spite of what the world is doing to them, do they have the capacity to love, to let go, to educate? Where do they get their tools, their weapons, their armor, but also their joy? And how can they communicate and teach that to the children that they have? And almost how dare they have children in that you could come from families that believe that they have a right to family, and then to believe in that lineage. So I had to go back to the 1950s to think of my parents now as an adult. I'm middle-aged, to think of who were they as three-dimensional people, as they were just being born, as they were coming of age in an America that felt like this is the young America in the 1950s. And this kind of young Rockefeller 1950s America was pretty much for white men. That really wasn't for even white women, definitely not minorities, definitely not for other groups. So I felt very drawn to that space of kind of America beginning, rock and roll, music, the cars with the big chrome tail fins, and that it's been made into this kind of distorted nostalgia in films and music and different things. So I think it gave me space as a novelist to go back into that world and have space to turn it around in my head, and then to also consider that so much of that 1950s civil rights energy is basically on stage now in this country. It's not like, oh, that was back then 30 years ago. Oh, John Lewis, Selma, all of that was then. That's all present now. So it's not, we're in civil rights war now. So I think that was some of the reason for me of going back to that time with a very personal and intimate thought of my parents were born, and what could they give me, and what promises could they give me, and what promises could they not, just because of how the world is constituted. Mm-hmm.
Yes, we are definitely much in the civil rights war now. So to continue that thought though, violence, right? Trauma, experiences of violence, sadly, it's very much relatable, right? Throughout the experiences that you write about and said in those times, in the 50s and the 60s during the civil rights movement, are very relatable to people living today in 2023, sadly. So since both of your books deal with violence and traumatic subjects, can you speak a little bit to how you create space for yourself to write about painful experiences? And if you consider your reader at all when sharing those types of experiences in your work?
Let me catch my breath for 1 minute, and then we could.
Well, it's an interesting question. Mm-hmm. That I'm even sitting here is improbable. Mm-hmm. If you are over 55, you know I'm telling the truth. Mm-hmm. My sitting here is improbable. this woman, being the Texas Poet Laureate, is improbable. I could not and would not have believed I could sit here when I was a child in Texas, in the Texas school systems, that did not have text that allowed me in them. I had to go outside of Texas to find Texas history. I experienced uber violence in a Texas under Jim Crow, and in a Texas that resisted letting Jim Crow go. Now, the interesting thing about that is my love of Texas is complete. I cannot not love this place because so many of its values were important to me. So many of its values I still carry, and even things that are not so good to carry. My braggadociousness is absolutely being from Texas. Are you here for it? Absolutely okay. Yeah, say all the things. However, in my text, I'm grappling with some of the new realities of Texas that I appreciate, some growth I've seen that I appreciate. I'm grappling with what would be generational conflict, because I feel like I'm two generations that are at war inside of me. There's the generation I'm born into, because I'm born in '63, but whose values I did not take. I carry the values of a generation younger than myself. And now they are going forward and carrying their values, but the generation before me will not let them do it. And they have to. They are the future. I'm kind of standing in the middle and watching this. I also think there's a generational value war that's going on. I don't want to see it be a violent one, like the one I came up in. I don't want to see those values of violence given to another generation. How do I do that? How do I espouse that, and yet I have a Texan heart? And we know Texans are wildfire. We hunt, we shoot, so we do. But I don't have children. I see my nephew in the audience. I want my nephew, who goes to U of T, I want my nephew to grow up with values where care and empathy and parity are privileged. And we have a saying in the Twin States. I live in Vermont now. New Hampshire is every man. Vermont is every man for every man. New Hampshire is every man for himself. Now, I agree with both of those things. In Texas, I want to carry both of those things, to value ourselves, but to also have enough empathy to value each other in ways I'm not quite seeing right now.
To add to that, and I'm just, my mind and my heart right now are just so engaged with every breath that we're putting into this space right now, and the ideas and the feelings of what it means. Also, the fact that we're actually all in this space versus a virtual conversation, the virtual violence. That feels really good and makes it feel immediate. And there's a sense in this empathy that you're bringing up, Vievee, of just, from labor itself, there is the space and agency of violence, of what it even means for Black women to bear children in this country, to have children, to make children, to not have children. This kind of American genesis, and you're speaking specifically, about Texas and then New Hampshire and Vermont, but just, thinking about the novel, this kind of relationship of violence everywhere. And, we could be in here for years talking about American violence and how we eat it and digest it and excrete it. Everywhere we go, we always have to be the best country in the world, the superpower. There's such a supremacy issue we have that holds violence everywhere. And that, for us, our entertainment is violence. Our joy, so much of the time, involves the killing, maiming, gagging, silencing of some other being, whether it's women, children, animals, our own environment we murder. So it's just for Promise, when you ask specifically about creating work, and this space too that I love Elizabeth Alexander, who says many things are true at once, where you can love the things about Texas that you mentioned, like what you said about Vermont and New Hampshire, that these things don't have to live as binaries in your mind. Right. And this is the thing too that we kind of drag ourselves on, are the binaries, and that they're on that side and we're this side, and here's the enemy and here's the hero. And this kind of thinking, I don't want to be judgmental that that's the bad thinking or that's we have to really go beyond the reductive things and constructs that encourage us to not listen, engage, respect divergent views or opinions. And, I think too, being born in 78, I also feel like in my wave of where I stand, I'm closer to younger generations. I'm not in your generation. I had a childhood where there were no cell phones yet. Like as I was leaving high school, AOL, shh, that had just begun. And now, my 5-year-old nephew will call me on FaceTime like, hey, auntie. And I'm like, who gave you the phone? Why you got the phone? And it's just, it's just a marvel. And yet I have to catch myself. I'm very vigilant when I'm talking or teaching or in spaces of resisting the easiness or just even sometimes laziness, I would say, or the convenience of leaning on the older generation. Because again, as I was saying before, well, they gave me that and now I'm them, but I'm not them. I'm actually really not them. And then I'm trying to also hold on to what's coming next and think how can I be not a midwife, but just a voice of someone who's asking questions. I think with Promise, it is a very hard book to read, but I'm also hoping for a reader that is prepared to do the work and travel with me. And again, I'm not here to entertain you. I have things to say. But we're engaging in an intimacy in reading, and that's one of the reasons I adore reading, because there's this intimacy, this relationship, there's a way of recognition, and we could call that empathy, that happens no matter who you are when you pick up a story and you're willing to travel in that story, whether you're in there and you say, well, that's me, or that's the enemy, or that, but that you are entering into a kind of truce or conversation or engagement. You're stepping into the village with your eyes open, and hopefully your heart is open to receiving. When I wrote Promise, there were so many times I got up from the table. I was on the floor writing this book. There were so many scenes that couldn't go in the book when you want to think about a reader. And I have heard many people say to me in my face, I had to put this book down. They came back or they didn't come back. And I had to respect that. I also had to respect the thought that I'm writing a historical novel where some of the research writing into Promise are accounts from things that I read that were too terrible for me to put in the book. So if my imagination was already at a point and the reality and the history is actually worse, well, what is that then? So, when you come as a creator into these spaces, there is a lot on your shoulders. There's a lot that's holding on to your guts, your bones, of who you are carrying, how you are carrying, who you need to be and are becoming, but also that relationship between yourself and the external spaces and voices and world beyond you. And then you're trying to even go out between that and look at all of it. So it's a lot. I mean, it's such a great question to think about.
No, I love how you both responded, though. I mean, ultimately, it rings true. You have things to say. You have things to say, and you have that call to arms, right? You have that call to action. And that sits in our bodies from day one, from before, as Black women especially, the work that we have had to do, not just in this country, but in the world, right? I've been saying this several times. I'm gonna put it in a paper essay somewhere, but I truly believe Black women are the antidote the world doesn't deserve. But here we are anyway. So.
My father would agree.
It's good medicine. But on that note of laughter in the truth, right? We still, I think that's one of the things too. Many things true at the same time, right? And Frankie Beverly and Mays reminded us that joy and pain exist. Sing if you know the words. Joy and pain, like sunshine
And rain.
and rain. All right. Hey. So can you speak to how in this incredible work you also center joy, both in the writing and in your life? We're not a monolith. We read some pretty hard and heavy work from these incredible authors and in general, but please know that, we are whole beings, right? And joy is always present in those lives as well. Can you speak to how joy is present in your work and your life?
I'm going to have you speak to that first.
I know. I hear you. You never say anything. It's like,
Well, I can say one thing, just to add a
Yes.
small 2 cents to this conversation.
Please.
Whenever I'm engaging work, including these incredible books, the first joy that I feel is gratitude that you wrote it. That is a place of joy for me, that every time I pick up a book by a Black woman writer, that she was brave enough, and I do mean brave, to sit down and write her story and then share it with the world. That brings me immense joy. So,
I just, happiness for me personally is more episodic. Like there's something, it's very focused. I'm happy in that instant. It feels immediate and in the moment and in the present. And so there's happiness. But the joy for me is a kind of active space that often for me is almost resists a certain kind of language or description, where I feel it and it's so connected to my body. And I loved how you brought up, Black women and our bodies too, and this kind of joy that allows us to laugh and smile and do the electric slide anywhere we choose to. I'm so here for the culture at all times, and I think there is this thing for me. I'm an artist, so I'm very visual too. Of just when you are in such darkness or encouraged that your own generation. A decade or two ago, nobody was talking about somebody's joy. Joy who? Who was that? And then I'm like, is it a brand now? Is it a
brand?
What is this kind of thing, joy, that people are talking about? Because it doesn't seem like June Jordan's joy or Audrey's joy or, joy in the morning if I'm talking about spirituals, or the biblical joy or the religious joy. So I get suspicious and I get a little itchy when I hear joy sometimes. And at the same time, there's something that people younger than me are hearing in joy by what they mean by it that I'm trying to understand and recognize. So I can be like, oh, you mean that kind of joy. Just, and that's cool, like that listening, because there's something at stake. Well, if I can't hear you, then we can't even come to the table and talk, because that's also what happened before me. Like, we can't even talk because I have to be so worried about like my legacy that you don't see me standing here and see that I'm delicate, and that, it's not just about therapy. That's not, sorry. So,
Yes.
all of that.
All that. I am devastated to have to say we are at time.
Oh,
I know.
Well, I was ready to go in.
Shut the door. Shut the door. We're gonna keep going. Oh, so I really had to literally bite my tongue just then to not ask another question, and unfortunately that means we also cannot open it up to questions. We are at time. Are only given so much space, but as you were saying, thank you for listening. Thank you for making the space for us to be whole and present here with you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for witnessing.
Thank you.
And thank you for supporting
so
these incredible authors. A round of applause.